What if the brightest flower you'll ever hold in your hands was sold by a little girl shivering in the snow, while the world walked past her without seeing? If this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the rest of this journey. The snow had fallen all afternoon, and by dusk, Fifth Avenue looked like a postcard painted in white. The glittering storefronts of Cartier and Saks reflected the soft yellow of the street lamps, casting warmth over the sleek black cars waiting for their owners. Men in tailored coats strode past, their voices loud and careless, while women in furs hurried inside cafes to escape the wind. Yet, pressed against the icy railings near a subway vent, a girl stood with a wicker basket clutched tight in her red, cracked hands. She was small, too small for the burden she carried. 8-year-old Amara Johnson wore a coat 2 sizes too big, the buttons mismatched, the lining frayed. Beneath her knit cap, her eyes were wide, dark, and filled with a quiet strength that fought against the cold. In her basket lay a scatter of flowers, daisies already wilting in the frost, roses bruised from the wind. Beside her, tucked against the railing, sat her brother Caleb. He was only 4, his cheeks hollow from hunger, his lips blue. He hugged his knees beneath a blanket so thin it seemed woven from mist. Every few seconds, his small cough broke into the swirl of holiday music spilling from a nearby store. "Flowers, sir? Please, just 1 flower," Amara whispered as businessmen swept by. They did not look at her. To them she was invisible, a shadow among the glow of wealth. A group of young men in expensive coats stopped in front of her. Their laughter was sharp, echoing in the stillness. One leaned close, pointing to the roses. "Look at this," he jeered. "Selling weeds in the snow. How much, girl?" Amara's voice shook. $2 for the roses, 50 cents for the daisies." The men smirked. One pulled out a crisp 20, waved it under her nose, then let the wind snatch it away. The bill fluttered down the street as they howled with laughter. "Wildflowers for wild kids," another sneered. "Not worth a dime." Her throat burned. She pressed her lips together, willing herself not to cry. She had promised Caleb she would never cry in front of strangers. But the tears came anyway, hot and fast, sliding down her cheeks as the men walked away, still laughing. And then, everything changed. A voice, calm but commanding, cut through the night. "That's enough." The men turned. A tall figure had stepped out of the shadows of the building. He was no older than 30, dressed in a charcoal coat that fit him like it had been tailored for a prince. His eyes were steel gray, sharp as winter itself. His name was Silas Mercer, heir to Mercer Financial, one of the most powerful firms in New York. To the city, he was a billionaire who preferred solitude. To Amara in that moment, he was simply a stranger who had seen her pain. Silas strode forward, reached into his coat, and pulled out a $100 bill. He took the roses from her trembling hands, pressed the bill into her palm, and said clearly enough for the mocking men to hear, "These flowers are priceless, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to hold them." For the first time all evening, Amara lifted her eyes to meet someone's gaze. His were not cold like the snow. They were fierce with anger at injustice, yet softened by something she could not name. The men muttered, shuffled away, their laughter broken. The street felt quieter without them. Silas crouched to her height. "What's your name?" Amara," she whispered. "This is my brother Caleb." He glanced at the little boy, huddled and shivering, his cough rattling his chest. The sight made something deep inside Silas ache, a memory of his own childhood when his mother's absence left an emptiness he never spoke about. "You've been out here long?" Silas asked. Amara nodded. "Since morning. We have to sell enough before we can eat." Her honesty pierced him. Around them, the avenue glittered with wealth, yet here was an 8-year-old fighting to keep her brother alive with wilted flowers. Silas's jaw tightened. He had spent years building walls of steel around his life. Deals, boardrooms, silent penthouses. But in that moment, a fragile crack opened. He reached down, lifted Caleb into his arms, and offered Amara his other hand. "Come," he said. "No child should be in the snow this long." Amara hesitated. We don't have money for a place." "You don't need money," he answered firmly. "You need warmth." She looked at his hand, then at her brother resting against his chest. Slowly, she placed her small fingers into his. They were rough from cold, but he held them as if they were delicate glass. As they walked toward the glow of a nearby cafe, Amara felt the strangest sensation, a mix of fear and hope. She didn't know who this man was, only that for the first time in a very long time, someone had not walked past her. Inside, the glass fogged from the sudden rush of warm air. The scent of cocoa and cinnamon filled the space. Silas guided them to a corner booth, ordered hot chocolate, and draped his coat over Caleb's shoulders. Amara's hands shook as she wrapped them around the steaming cup. For the first time that winter, she felt her body begin to thaw. She glanced at Silas. He sat quietly across from them, watching, as if he too was thawing from a different kind of frost. And in the silence of that cafe, among strangers sipping lattes, something unspoken bound them together: a little girl's tears, a boy's cough, and a man who had forgotten how to feel, until now. The cafe was alive with golden light, a cocoon against the storm outside. Frost clung to the windows like lace, muffling the city's endless roar. Inside, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups, and the hum of conversation created a warmth that felt almost unreal to Amara. She sat on the leather seat, clutching a steaming mug in both hands. The cocoa was topped with a mountain of whipped cream, something she had only ever seen in passing through cafe windows. For a moment she did not drink, only let the steam rise into her face, thawing the cold from her skin. Across from her, Silas Mercer leaned back, his coat draped over the seat, his gaze steady but softened, as though he was trying to see past the girl's fragile frame into the story she carried. Beside Amara, Caleb sat perched on a cushion, his little fingers wrapped clumsily around the mug. He leaned forward, his lips leaving a small white mustache of cream that made him blink in surprise. A small laugh bubbled from his throat, a sound so light, so unfamiliar, it startled even Amara. "You've never had this before?" Silas asked gently. Caleb shook his head, licking his upper lip. "It's warm." His voice was husky, but a faint smile tugged at his mouth. Amara lowered her eyes. "We usually only drink water. Sometimes, the bakery down the block leaves day-old rolls in a bag by the door. That's a good day." Silas's chest tightened. He had been raised in penthouses with chefs preparing breakfast, silver trays gleaming with croissants. Yet, here before him was an 8-year-old speaking of bread scraps as blessings. He forced his voice to remain even. "How long have you been out here?" "Since Mama got sick," Amara said, her small fingers circling the mug. "She worked cleaning offices until she couldn't. The doctor said her lungs were tired. She coughed a lot, even when she tried to sing to us." Her eyes shimmered, but she steadied herself. "She told me to look after Caleb. Then she went to the hospital. She never came back." Silas looked down at the table. The wood grain blurred. Memories long buried surged up, of his own mother's illness, the silence of hospital corridors, the way his father's face had hardened like stone. He remembered being a boy who waited by the window for footsteps that never returned. He took a slow breath. "And your father?" he asked carefully. Amara's lips tightened. "He left before Caleb was born. Mama said he wasn't ready to be a dad. So, it's just us." Her voice did not carry self-pity, only a quiet resilience. Yet the words struck Silas like cold wind. He had grown up with a father present in body, but absent in heart. Amara had neither. Somehow she carried herself with a steadiness that shamed men twice her age. Caleb leaned against his sister, drowsy from warmth. Amara adjusted the coat around him, smoothing his hair with a tenderness that made Silas's throat ache. "I sell flowers near the subway," she explained. "A woman pays me to take leftover bundles that don't sell at her stall. If I bring in enough, she gives me coins for food. At night, we find places. Laundromats are safest. The machines are loud, so no one notices us. I wash Caleb's clothes in the sink. That way he always looks clean when we go out." Her words were matter-of-fact, but every detail pressed deeper into Silas's conscience. He imagined the girl standing on a stool at a laundromat sink, scrubbing tiny shirts while her brother slept on a plastic chair. He pictured her curling against him on the tile floor, whispering lullabies to mask the sound of strangers. Silas cleared his throat. "You read?" Amara's face lit, if only faintly. "At the library. Mama used to read me books before bed. When she couldn't anymore, I kept going. Caleb likes when I read about trains. He dreams of being a conductor one day." Caleb mumbled, half asleep. "Choo-choo." His small voice drew the faintest smile from Silas. The cafe noise swelled around them. Laughter, the scrape of chairs, the hum of life that often blurred past Silas. But in this booth, the world narrowed to 3 people bound by chance and something more invisible. Amara finally lifted her cup, sipping. Sweetness spread across her tongue, startling in its richness. She wanted to savor it slowly, as if it might vanish if she drank too fast. She glanced at Silas, studying the man who had stopped in the snow for her when no one else had. "You don't have to sit with us," she whispered. "I know," Silas replied. His tone was steady, carrying a weight she did not understand but somehow trusted. "But I want to." Silas Mercer had spent years shielding himself behind silence, behind billion-dollar negotiations and towering glass offices. Yet here he was, leaning forward across a cafe table toward 2 children who had nothing, children who, somehow, reminded him of everything he had once longed for. Outside, snowflakes danced beneath the streetlights, coating the city in white. Inside, a little boy drank his first hot chocolate, and his sister, who had learned to carry the world, allowed herself, for just a heartbeat, to feel like a child. Silas did not yet know what this night would demand of him. He only knew that for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something warmer than any fire, a sense of belonging waiting to be claimed. Madison Square Park in winter was a patchwork of bare branches, iron benches, and a thin quilt of snow that dulled the city's usual rush. Pigeons shuffled near the fountains, pecking at crumbs left behind, while the Flatiron Building loomed like a sentinel at the park's edge. Few lingered in the cold, save for one small figure bent low near the shrubs, her mittenless fingers digging into the frozen soil. Silas Mercer paused at the entrance, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He had not expected to return so soon, but something in his chest had insisted he check the park. And there she was, Amara, the girl with eyes far older than her years, kneeling in the snow as if searching for treasure no one else could see. He crossed the path quietly, his polished shoes crunching. "Amara?" The girl startled, then quickly shielded something behind her back. Her coat, thin as paper, was dusted with white. Caleb sat a few feet away on the bench, his legs swinging, watching his sister with solemn trust. "What are you doing?" Silas asked, his voice gentle. Amara hesitated, then slowly revealed her hands. They were dirty and red from cold. Clutching a small cluster of stems she had tugged from the earth, winter weeds with tiny frost-bitten buds. She cradled them as if they were roses. "I'm making the flowers prettier," she said simply. "The ones I sell look tired. If I add these, maybe people will think they're special." Her words lodged in Silas's heart. Most children her age would be playing tag in the park or drawing shapes in the snow. Yet here she was, hunting scraps of beauty to sell in order to feed her brother. "Your hands must hurt," Silas murmured, crouching to her level. Amara shrugged. "Mama said beauty can come from anywhere, even weeds if you look close enough. She used to braid little ones into my hair. People laughed, but she said they were crowns from the earth." Silas's throat tightened. He studied the weeds in her palm, suddenly unsure who was teaching whom about value. Caleb tugged on Silas's sleeve. "Amara reads about flowers, too," he said with a proud grin. Silas turned to the girl. "You read?" She nodded quickly, almost defensively. "At the library. They don't mind if I stay in the corner. I remember what Mama taught me. She said if I keep reading, the world can't forget me." "What do you read?" Silas asked. "History books, stories about planets, poems, and recipes sometimes, though I can't cook very well." She gave a small laugh that vanished as soon as it came. "When it's too cold outside, I tell Caleb stories so he can dream instead of feeling hungry." Silas leaned back on his heels, watching her. An 8-year-old girl with no school, no stability, yet she carried the discipline of a scholar and the heart of a caretaker. In her eyes flickered intelligence and longing, a fire that refused to be extinguished by circumstance. "Why here, Amara?" he asked softly. "Why the park?" Her shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "It's quiet. People don't look at me the same way. And sometimes when the sun sets, the snow turns pink on the grass. I like to think Mama can see it too." The honesty in her voice cut deeper than any corporate argument Silas had faced. He glanced at Caleb, whose small head had tipped sideways, dozing against the bench. He could imagine Amara sitting here alone, the weight of responsibility crushing her tiny frame, still determined to find scraps of hope in frozen soil. "Do you ever think about what you want for yourself?" Silas asked. Amara tilted her head. "For myself?" She seemed puzzled by the question. "I want Caleb to be safe. That's all. If he can be safe, then I'll be okay." The simplicity of her answer made Silas ache. He thought of his own life, penthouse apartments, mergers, the relentless pressure of family legacy. None of it felt as pure as the desire of an 8-year-old who had lost everything, yet still gave her entire heart to her brother. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pair of leather gloves, and held them out. "These are too big for you, but they're warm. Take them." Amara hesitated. "They'll get dirty." "That doesn't matter," Silas said firmly. "What matters is your hands. You can't protect Caleb if you can't feel your fingers." Slowly she accepted them, slipping them on. The gloves hung loose, but warmth spread instantly. She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with something he recognized. Reluctant trust. For a long moment, they stood in the quiet park, the city rushing around them unseen. A billionaire who had built walls of glass and steel around his soul, and a little girl who tore through them simply by kneeling in the snow, clutching weeds. Silas exhaled. "Amara, you don't have to do this alone." Her gaze darted to Caleb, then back to him. "But no one stays. People say nice things, but they always leave." His chest tightened. He wanted to tell her he was different, though he wasn't sure he believed it yet himself. Still, the words came out before he could stop them. Then let me prove I'm not one of them. She searched his face, as if weighing whether he was just another fleeting kindness. Then, with a small nod, she tucked the weeds into her basket, sat beside her brother, and whispered, "Okay." Silas stood over them, realizing he had just made a promise, not only to her but to himself. A promise that would change the trajectory of all their lives. The wind stirred, carrying with it the faint chime of church bells. The sky darkened over Madison Square Park, but inside Silas Mercer something had begun to awaken. The fragile, powerful conviction that perhaps he was being led toward a family he had never dared to imagine. The storm rolled into Manhattan like a beast unchained. By evening, snow was falling so thick it erased the outlines of taxis, drowned sirens, and silenced the impatient horns that usually defined the city. Central Park disappeared behind a curtain of white, and sidewalks turned into rivers of slush no one dared to cross. Amara pressed her back against the wall of a subway entrance, her arms wrapped tight around Caleb. The cardboard box they had dragged from an alley trembled in the wind, barely shielding them. Each gust scattered icy crystals across their faces. Caleb whimpered, his small body convulsing with shivers. His lips were pale, his eyes heavy. "Amara," he whispered, "I'm cold." She pulled him closer, tucking his face into her chest. Her own teeth chattered, but she pressed her cheek to his hair and murmured, "Just hold on, Caleb. We'll be okay." She said it not because she believed it, but because he needed to hear it. The snow piled higher. People hurried past, bundled in fur and leather, their boots splashing without slowing. None stopped. None even glanced at the two shadows huddled against the wind. Amara blinked through frozen lashes, trying to remember her mother's lullaby. Her voice cracked as she hummed, the melody dissolving into the storm. Caleb's eyelids drooped. She shook him gently. "Stay awake, Caleb. Stay with me." A sudden beam of headlights swept across the corner, stopping in front of the subway. A black SUV idled, its tires crunching the snow. The back door opened, and out stepped Silas Mercer. He had been leaving a late meeting when the weather turned ferocious. Something, an instinct he couldn't name, had driven him to check the usual corners where he'd seen the children before. And now, seeing them curled inside cardboard while the city drowned in white, he felt his chest split with urgency. "Amara!" His voice cut through the storm. Her head jerked up, eyes wide. "Mr. Mercer?" He crossed the sidewalk in long strides, snow soaking his shoes, and crouched beside them. Caleb was limp in her arms, barely conscious. Without hesitation, Silas swept the boy into his own coat, his arms firm and protective. "Come on," he said, holding out his free hand to Amara. She shook her head, frightened. We can't go. We don't have money." Silas's voice broke, rawer than he intended. "You don't need money. You need safety." The wind howled around them. For a moment, Amara looked at her brother's fragile body cradled against this man's chest. Something in his tone, unyielding, urgent, almost desperate, melted her resistance. She placed her small hand in his. He guided her into the SUV, the warmth hitting them like a wave. Caleb stirred faintly, sighing against Silas's chest. Amara climbed in after, her eyes darting across the leather seats and glowing dashboard. It was another world. The driver pulled away, cutting through snow-choked avenues. Silas kept his coat wrapped around Caleb, watching the boy's shallow breaths. He felt Amara's gaze flicker between him and her brother, her face taut with fear. Minutes later, the SUV stopped before a towering building on the Upper East Side. Glass doors swung open as the doorman hurried to greet them. eyes widening at the sight of two children bundled in rags. Silas ignored the stairs, carrying Caleb inside with Amara gripping his sleeve. They rode the private elevator up 30 floors. When the doors opened, they stepped into Silas's apartment, a vast expanse of marble floors, tall windows, and walls that gleamed like untouched galleries. The space echoed with silence. For years, Silas had lived here alone, filling the rooms with luxury but never with life. Tonight, that silence was broken by the soft whimper of a boy and the trembling breaths of his sister. "Follow me," Silas said. He led them to a guest bedroom, flicked on the lights, and set Caleb gently on the bed. He called to his housekeeper, who rushed in with towels and blankets. "Hot bath," he instructed. "Now." Steam soon curled from the adjoining bathroom. Amara watched, hesitant, as Silas lifted Caleb and carried him inside. He set the boy carefully into the warm water, supporting his small head with surprising tenderness. Caleb gasped at the heat, then relaxed, a faint smile flickering as the color returned to his cheeks. Amara stood in the doorway, her hands clenched. Do we have to pay for this?" Her voice was small, terrified. Silas turned, meeting her eyes. His own voice cracked under the weight of her question. "No. Amara, not a cent. You don't pay for warmth. You don't pay for kindness. Not here." The words hung heavy in the tiled room. She stared at him as if trying to measure the truth of what he said. Slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased. Later, wrapped in clean pajamas the housekeeper found, Caleb fell asleep beneath thick blankets, his breathing steady at last. Amara sat at the edge of the bed, her small hand resting protectively on his chest. Silas stood by the doorway, watching. The storm outside battered the windows, but inside, warmth cocooned them. For the first time in months, the children were safe. And for the first time in years, Silas felt his home stir with life. As he turned off the light, he heard Amara's whisper, "Thank you." He paused, looking back at her. This small, fierce girl who had carried burdens heavier than her age should allow. He wanted to say more, but the lump in his throat silenced him. He only nodded. And in that moment, as the snowstorm raged over New York, a new storm brewed in Silas Mercer's heart, one not of ice, but of awakening. The storm finally broke. Days later, sunlight filtered through tall windows of the Mercer penthouse, melting the icicles that had clung to its stone balcony. Inside, warmth lingered, not just from the heating system that hummed quietly in the walls, but from something far more elusive. Laughter. For the first time in years, Silas Mercer heard it echo through his home. Caleb's giggles bounced across the polished marble as he chased a toy car along the floor. The sound was innocent, unrestrained, and utterly foreign to an apartment that had known only silence. Amara sat at the kitchen counter, legs swinging, brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to peel an orange with hands too small for the task. She had insisted on helping prepare breakfast, though the fruit looked more mangled than sliced. Silas leaned against the doorway, watching them with quiet astonishment. He had hosted investors in this kitchen, held late-night strategy calls here, even eaten solitary meals on the spotless granite counter. But never had the space felt alive, until now. The housekeeper entered, shaking her head fondly at the mess. "Mr. Mercer, I think your little guests are trying to take over my job." Amara flushed, wiping her sticky fingers on a paper towel. "I just wanted to help. Mama always said a home should smell like food, not just look pretty." Her words struck him. This apartment, with its glass chandeliers and rare art, had always impressed guests, but never comforted him. It had been beautiful, yes, but sterile, like a showroom. Now, with juice dripping down the counter and a child's laughter filling the air, it felt transformed. Later, Amara wandered through the living room, Caleb trailing behind with crayons. The boy toddled to the white wall near the window and began to draw, wobbly lines, stick figures, a sun with too many rays. Amara gasped. "Caleb, no! You can't draw on walls." Silas stepped in before tears could well. "Wait." He crouched beside the boy, studying the crooked sun. Then he glanced up at Amara, who stood horrified. "Do you know," he said softly, "when I was his age, I drew on walls too? My mother let me cover the kitchen pantry with dinosaurs. She said it was proof her house had life inside it." Amara blinked. "And your father?" Silas's smile dimmed. "He painted over them the next day." The silence lingered. Then Amara stepped forward, pulled a piece of paper from her notebook, and taped it neatly over the drawing. "Then we'll keep Caleb's son safe," she said firmly. Something inside Silas shifted. This little girl had taken chaos and turned it into belonging. That evening, Silas returned from a meeting to find the refrigerator transformed. On it, held by magnets shaped like fruit, was a piece of paper in Amara's careful handwriting. In block letters, it read, "Our Home." Beneath the words, she had drawn 3 stick figures, herself, Caleb, and a tall figure with dark hair. She had labeled them Amara, Caleb, Silas. Silas stood frozen, briefcase still in hand. No contract, no merger, no billion-dollar deal had ever hit him with such force. The words pressed into his chest, stirring something long dormant. This was not his penthouse anymore. This was a place children dared to call home. When Amara saw him staring, she hurried over, embarrassed. I didn't mean... I just thought, maybe, while we're here it could feel like ours too. Just for a little." His throat closed. He reached out, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Amara, before you came, these walls were just walls. Now they breathe." Her eyes glistened, and for the first time she allowed herself a shy smile. But later, when the children had fallen asleep in the guest room, Silas remained at the kitchen counter, staring at that piece of paper. A gnawing worry crawled into his chest. He had the power to offer them warmth, food, safety. But the law was another matter. New York's Child Protective Services could arrive any day. Without custody rights, he was simply a man giving shelter to 2 orphans. If they were taken, if the city decided he wasn't fit. The thought hollowed him. He had faced hostile takeovers, ruthless competitors, market collapses, but nothing terrified him like the possibility of losing the children who had turned his house into a home. That night, as snow melted on the streets below, Silas Mercer lay awake in his penthouse bedroom, the sound of Caleb's distant breathing carrying faintly through the hall. On his refrigerator, 3 words glowed under the soft light. Our home. And for the first time in his life, Silas prayed, not for profit, not for power, but for the right to keep what had unexpectedly become his family. The days in the Mercer penthouse began to settle into a rhythm, if rhythm could be the right word for something so new, so delicate. Morning sunlight poured across the kitchen, where Amara tried to master pancakes under the housekeeper's watchful eye. Caleb grew stronger, his cheeks filling out as he raced his toy cars across marble floors. And Silas, he found himself lingering at home longer than ever before, reluctant to leave the world that had begun to glow with their presence. But the demands of his empire did not wait. Mercer Financial was entering the final stage of a massive merger, one that consumed hours of strategy calls, late-night boardroom negotiations, and endless press inquiries. Silas spent long days behind glass towers in Midtown, his phone buzzing until it felt like part of his pulse. On one of those evenings, he returned well past dark. The penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. He set his briefcase down, called out, "Amara? Caleb?" No reply. Then he saw it. By the door, leaning against the wall, was a small red backpack. Its zipper was open, stuffed with neatly folded shirts, a worn stuffed bear, and a notebook. Beside it lay Amara's scuffed shoes. His chest tightened. He found her in the guest bedroom, crouched by the bed, whispering to Caleb. The boy clutched his bear, his eyes sleepy but troubled. Amara's own eyes were wet. She startled when she saw Silas. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice lower than he intended. Amara pressed her lips together. We're going to leave." The words cracked him open. "Why?" She stood, fists clenched, her small shoulders stiff with pride. "Because we don't belong here. You're busy. You have work. People like us. We're just a problem. I won't let Caleb be a burden." Her voice trembled at the edges, but the resolve in her eyes was like steel. Silas stepped closer, his chest aching. "A burden?" He shook his head, incredulous. "Amara, before you came, this place was empty. I had everything money could buy, and it was nothing. Since you've been here, I come home and it finally feels alive. Don't you see? You are not a burden. You are the reason this house has become a home." Her breath hitched. She glanced at Caleb, then back at him, suspicion warring with hope. "But everyone leaves. They say kind things, but then they go." The rawness in her words pierced him deeper than any accusation ever had. He crouched, lowering himself to her level. His voice broke as he said, "Amara, I know what it's like to be left behind. I lost my mother when I was young. I know the emptiness it leaves. And I swear to you, I will not let you feel that again. Not while I breathe." The silence stretched, heavy with truth. Caleb's small hand reached for his sister's. "Amara, I want to stay." Her resolve cracked. A tear slid down her cheek. "But what if they take us away?" Silas swallowed hard, the weight of his own fears pressing down. "Then I will fight. I don't care what it takes. I'll fight for you. For both of you." For a long moment, the only sound was the storm of the city beyond the glass. Then slowly, Amara dropped her gaze to the backpack. With trembling fingers, she unzipped it and pulled out the stuffed bear, pressing it into Caleb's arms. Finally, she whispered, "Okay, we'll stay." Relief surged through Silas so strong he nearly staggered. He reached out, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "Good, because this is your home, and I am not going anywhere." Later that night, when the children were asleep, Silas stood in the hallway staring at the red backpack still by the door. He could not bring himself to move it. It was more than fabric and zippers. It was a symbol of fear, of a life lived always on the edge of flight. But it was also a turning point. Tonight, Amara had chosen trust, fragile though it was. And for Silas Mercer, that trust was more valuable than every dollar his company had ever earned. The knock came on a Tuesday morning. It was sharp, official, the kind of sound that made the walls of the Mercer penthouse feel suddenly thin. Amara froze in the kitchen, a spoon clattering from her hand into the cereal bowl. Caleb, still in his pajamas, looked up from the floor where he had been building a tower of blocks. His wide eyes darted to his sister. "Amara, who's that?" Before she could answer, Silas appeared from the hallway, his tie half knotted, coffee in hand. His brow furrowed at the sound. He crossed the living room and opened the door. Standing there was a woman in a dark wool coat, her badge clipped neatly to her lapel. Her eyes were steady, not unkind, but clinical. "Mr. Mercer? Elaine Winters, Child Protective Services." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Silas stepped aside slowly. "Come in." Elaine entered, scanning the immaculate apartment. Her gaze softened slightly as it landed on Amara and Caleb, who had instinctively moved close together, their shoulders pressed tight. "I received a report," Elaine began, setting her briefcase on the counter. "2 minors currently residing here without guardianship papers." She glanced at Silas. "I need to conduct a welfare check." Amara's heart hammered. She grabbed Caleb's hand. The cereal bowl tipped, milk spilling across the counter. In her chest, panic bloomed. "They've come to take us away." Elaine crouched, her voice calm. "You must be Amara. And this is your brother?" Amara pulled Caleb back, shaking her head. "We don't need anyone. We're fine. We'll go." Her words tumbled out in a rush, as if leaving quickly might save them from being torn apart. She darted toward the door, tugging Caleb with her. "Amara!" Silas's voice stopped her mid-stride. She turned, eyes wet, her chest heaving. "You said you'd keep us safe, but now she's here. They always take us away. Always." Her cry ripped through him. In that instant, Silas understood the scars she carried. Years of moving, of being shifted from stranger to stranger, of never belonging long enough to exhale. He crossed the room, dropping to his knees in front of her. "Amara, look at me." His voice trembled, but did not break. "No matter what happens, I will fight for you. For Caleb. I promise." Elaine's eyes narrowed, but not unkindly. She had seen enough to know this wasn't an act. Still, she opened her notebook. "Mr. Mercer, I'll need to ask you some questions about the children's care, education, and health." Silas rose, steel returning to his voice. "Ask anything you need. But understand this. They are not going back to the streets. Not while I have breath." Elaine studied him, then glanced at Amara. The girl's small frame shook with the effort of holding back tears. Finally, Elaine closed her notebook. "Mr. Mercer, we will schedule a formal hearing. Until then, the children remain here under provisional custody. But be prepared. The process is rigorous." Silas nodded once. "Then rigorous it will be." When the door closed behind her, Amara stood trembling in the hallway. She looked at Silas, searching his face for cracks, for signs of retreat. Instead, she saw only resolve. "Do you mean it?" she whispered. He placed a hand on her shoulder, then knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "Amara, I've built companies, fought boardrooms, faced down men who would burn me to ash. None of it matters compared to this. Yes, I mean it. I will fight until you and Caleb are safe, legally, forever." Her lips parted, but no words came. Then, slowly, she threw her arms around his neck, clinging with all the force her small frame could muster. For a heartbeat, Silas stood stunned. Then he wrapped her close, feeling the weight of her fear and the fragile spark of her trust. From the doorway of the guest room, Caleb's sleepy voice piped up. "Silas, are we still staying?" Silas looked at him over Amara's shoulder. His throat tightened. "Yes, Caleb. You're staying. With me." The boy smiled faintly, hugging his bear tighter. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Silas stood by the refrigerator staring at the paper Amara had taped there. Our home. His reflection wavered in the stainless steel. He pressed his hand against the word our, as though trying to anchor it. The knock of the social worker still echoed in his ears. A reminder that love was not enough. He would have to fight the system itself. But as the city lights blinked beyond the glass, he knew one thing with certainty. He would not fail them. The Mercer boardroom, perched high above Park Avenue, gleamed with glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, but inside the atmosphere was colder than the February wind outside. Edward Mercer, patriarch of the family empire, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table. His silver hair was slicked back, his tailored suit immaculate, his gaze sharp as a hawk's. Around him sat senior partners and board members, their voices hushed, awaiting the clash they knew was inevitable. Silas entered, shoulders squared, his jaw set. He had faced hostile takeovers and billion-dollar disputes, but never had his steps felt heavier than walking into the judgment of his father. "Close the doors," Edward ordered. The room fell silent. He fixed his son with a glare that could slice granite. "I've heard disturbing reports. 2 street children living under your roof?" Murmurs rippled through the board. Silas did not flinch. "They have names. Amara and Caleb Johnson." Edward's palm hit the table. "Names do not matter. Appearances do. You are on the brink of finalizing a merger that will define this company for decades. Do you realize what the press will say if they learn the heir to Mercer Financial is playing guardian to strays?" Silas's voice cut back, calm but firm. "If the press learns, they will say what I want them to say, that I refused to walk past children freezing in the snow, that I gave them what every child deserves, safety." Edward leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Safety is not the issue. Legacy is. We are Mercers. We do not gamble our reputation on sentiment." The words struck like ice. For years, Silas had lived under this doctrine: profit over people, legacy over love. Yet now, with Amara's shy smile and Caleb's fragile trust burned into his memory, the old creed rang hollow. He took a steady breath. "Father, when I was 8, do you remember what you gave me for my birthday?" Edward blinked, annoyed. "What does that matter?" "You gave me a leather briefcase," Silas said quietly. "I didn't want a briefcase. I wanted my mother back, but she was gone and you buried yourself in business. I grew up with money but without comfort, without family. That emptiness nearly killed me. And I'll be damned if I let Amara and Caleb feel that same void." The room stilled. Edward's jaw tightened. For the first time, his eyes flickered with something less certain. "Silas," he said, his tone quieter but no softer, "you think you are saving them, but you are sacrificing your name. This merger will collapse if investors doubt your stability." Silas straightened, his voice rising with conviction. "Then let it collapse. I would rather lose a deal than lose those children. They are not distractions. They are my family." Gasps echoed. A partner leaned forward, whispering to Edward, but the older man raised a hand for silence. He studied his son, his expression unreadable. Finally, Edward spoke, his words measured. "You sound like your mother, always chasing ideals, always forgetting the cost. She wanted to fund orphanages. Remember? To give away Mercer money to causes that never paid dividends. It was weakness." Silas's eyes flared. "No, it was strength. She saw what you could not. That wealth means nothing if it builds walls instead of homes." The boardroom air crackled with tension. For a long moment, father and son locked eyes. 2 Mercers, two visions of legacy colliding like titans. Edward leaned back at last, exhaling slowly. The steel in his gaze softened by a fraction. "You've changed, Silas." Silas nodded once. "No, Father. I've grown." The silence stretched. Then Edward waved a hand dismissively. "Do what you will, but understand. If you choose them, you choose a harder road. Do not expect my shield when the storm comes." "I don't need your shield," Silas replied, his voice steady. "I have something stronger. I have a reason." He turned, leaving the boardroom. Behind him, murmurs rose again, but he did not care. His father's disapproval no longer weighed heavier than Amara's trust. That evening, Silas returned to the penthouse. The children greeted him at the door, Caleb clutching his bear, Amara with a cautious smile. He knelt, pulling them both close. "Did he yell at you?" Amara asked softly. Silas gave a faint smile. "Yes, but I yelled back." Her eyes widened. "At your father?" "Yes," Silas said, ruffling Caleb's hair. "Because some things matter more than boardrooms. Like you, like family." Amara's lips curved into the smallest, truest smile he had ever seen. And for the first time in years, Silas Mercer felt not the weight of a legacy, but the freedom of choosing his own. The courtroom on Center Street carried the weight of history. Its marble pillars and oak benches had witnessed countless trials, fraud cases, family disputes, custody battles. But on this gray morning, the silence inside felt heavier than any criminal proceeding. For two children, everything was at stake. Amara sat stiffly on the front bench, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress chosen by Silas's housekeeper, her hair neatly braided. Caleb sat beside her, clutching a stuffed bear, his small legs swinging nervously. His other hand clung to his sister's, refusing to let go. Silas sat behind them, his tailored suit immaculate, yet his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. He had faced billion-dollar negotiations, entire markets depending on his decisions, but never had his hands trembled as they did now. This was not about profit. This was about family. The bailiff called, "Case 428, Mercer versus State of New York, Department of Child Services." The judge, a woman with gray hair pulled into a bun, peered over her glasses. "We are here to determine guardianship of Amara Johnson, age 8, and Caleb Johnson, age 4. Mr. Mercer, I understand you are petitioning for adoption." "Yes, Your Honor," Silas said, standing. His voice was steady, though his chest hammered. Across the aisle, an attorney representing Child Protective Services rose. "Your Honor, while Mr. Mercer's intentions may be admirable, these children were found without legal guardianship, living on the streets. Our concern is whether placing them in the custody of a man whose life is consumed by corporate affairs serves their best interest." Whispers rippled through the gallery. Silas clenched his jaw. The judge turned to the children. "Amara, would you come forward?" The girl stiffened, eyes darting to Silas. He gave her the faintest nod, mouthing, "It's okay." Slowly, she rose, walking to the witness stand, her small shoes echoing in the vast room. "State your name for the record," the judge said. "I'm Amara Johnson," she whispered. "Amara," the judge continued gently, "can you tell me why you want to stay with Mr. Mercer?" The courtroom hushed. All eyes turned to the little girl standing so small against the high-backed chair. Her throat worked, but her voice came clear, strong. "Because—" She glanced at Caleb, who watched with wide eyes. "Because before Mr. Mercer, we didn't have a home. We slept in laundromats or boxes when it snowed. Caleb used to cry every night, asking where home was. I didn't know what to say." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. The first night we stayed with him, Caleb finally slept without crying. And when the judge asks me why I want to stay, it's because, for the first time in our lives, my little brother called a place home. The silence broke with a collective intake of breath. Even the court stenographer paused for a fraction before resuming her keys. The judge's eyes softened. "Thank you, Amara. You may sit." As she returned to the bench, Caleb climbed onto her lap, burying his face in her shoulder. She kissed his hair, whispering, "It's okay." The CPS attorney rose again. "Your Honor, touching as that was, we must consider stability. Mr. Mercer runs a billion-dollar corporation. Can he truly provide these children the constant care they need?" Silas stood, his voice ringing with conviction. "Your Honor, I have spent years building empires that mean nothing compared to the trust of these children. I have resources to ensure their health, their education, their safety. But more than that, I have what cannot be measured in profit or contracts. I have chosen them, and I will not let them go." He turned toward the gallery where Edward Mercer sat in silence, his expression carved in stone. For the first time, Silas did not falter under his father's gaze. The judge considered for a long moment, then lifted her gavel. "This court recognizes that children need more than shelter and food. They need love, stability, and belonging. Mr. Mercer, though your path may be unconventional, it is clear to this court that your home provides exactly that." She signed the papers. "Guardianship and adoption are hereby granted. Amara and Caleb Johnson will now be known legally as Amara Mercer and Caleb Mercer." The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder, final, irrevocable, and life-changing. Amara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Caleb blinked, then whispered, "We're Mercers now." Silas knelt, gathering them both in his arms. "Yes," he whispered, voice breaking. "You're my family. Forever." The courtroom blurred in that moment. Lawyers, reporters, even Edward Mercer's stoic figure faded. What remained was the sight of two children finally claimed, and a man who had discovered his true legacy not in boardrooms, but in the fragile hearts that had chosen to trust him. The first day of spring arrived with sunlight that stretched across New York like a promise. The city's snowbanks had melted into gutters. Crocuses pushed their heads through patches of thawed soil in Central Park, and a soft breeze replaced the bitter sting of winter. At the Mercer penthouse, the morning carried a new kind of energy. The children woke before dawn, excitement bubbling through the hallways. Amara smoothed the skirt of her blue uniform dress, her braids neatly tied with ribbons. Caleb, in his tiny button-down shirt and sneakers that still looked too new, clutched his bear until the very last moment. Today was not just their first day of school. It was their first day walking into the world as Mercers. Silas stood by the kitchen counter, coffee forgotten, watching them with quiet awe. He had signed contracts worth billions, yet nothing compared to this. Two children bouncing on their toes, preparing for something as ordinary and miraculous as school. "You nervous?" he asked, kneeling to Caleb's height. The boy shook his head fiercely. "Nope, because Amara will be there." He tugged his sister's sleeve, beaming. Amara gave him a look both proud and protective. "I'll be right down the hall, and you'll make friends. Just don't talk about trains too much, okay?" Silas chuckled, ruffling her hair. "And you, Amara? Nervous?" She hesitated, then admitted softly, "A little. I've never belonged in a class before." His hand rested gently on her shoulder. "You belong everywhere, Amara. Don't forget that." The drive to the school was filled with chatter, Caleb counting the taxis they passed, Amara rehearsing how she would introduce herself. Silas listened, his chest tightening with the realization of how far they had come from a cardboard box in a blizzard. When they arrived, the schoolyard buzzed with children running, laughing, greeting friends. Parents lingered by the gates, waving, kissing foreheads. For a moment, Amara froze, clutching her backpack. Caleb pressed close to her side, suddenly shy. Silas bent down, his voice calm but steady. "You don't have to prove anything. Just walk in and be who you are." Amara nodded, took a breath, and stepped forward. In the classroom, she stood before rows of curious eyes. The teacher smiled kindly. "Would you like to introduce yourself, dear?" Amara swallowed, then spoke with a strength she didn't know she had. "My name is Amara Mercer, and this is my brother Caleb." The room erupted in applause, not mockery, but welcome. Caleb grinned, waving his bear proudly. Amara's cheeks flushed, and for the first time she smiled without holding back. From the doorway, Silas watched, unseen by most. His chest swelled, his throat tight. In those clapping hands, he saw the acknowledgement she had long been denied. When school ended, Amara and Caleb ran through the gates, their faces glowing with stories. Caleb's new friend who liked trains, Amara's first time raising her hand in class. They crashed into Silas's arms, laughter ringing against the afternoon sun. Driving home, they passed Madison Square Park. Amara looked out the window, spotting the patch of ground where she once dug for weeds in the snow. Her voice was soft. "Do you remember, Mr. Mercer? That's where you found me." He nodded. "And I'll never forget it." That evening, in the penthouse living room, the three of them gathered on the couch. The housekeeper had framed Amara's old paper that once hung crookedly on the refrigerator. It now stood proudly on the mantelpiece. Our home. Silas pulled the children close, one arm around each. The city lights twinkled through the tall windows like stars scattered across glass. Caleb yawned, resting his head against Silas's chest. Amara leaned in on the other side, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're really a family now, aren't we?" Silas kissed the crown of her head. "Yes, Amara. We are a family. Forever." The moment stretched, warm and unbroken. For Silas, whose life had been defined by hollow victories and lonely penthouses, this was the legacy he had never imagined. Not money, not mergers, but laughter on his floors, drawings on his walls, small hands that trusted him. The Mercers had once been known for power and profit, but in this apartment, in this room, they were something richer. They were home. And as the city hummed outside, within those walls lived a promise sealed not by blood, but by love, the kind of love that outlasts storms, courtrooms, and even time itself. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next journey of love, hope, and healing.